Thank you. On the issues of the national question, support for the Irish Party or Sinn Féin, and on the attitudes towards the treaty, was there any difference in the views or votes of women compared to men? Basically, did the extension of the franchise, influence the result of any elections? And also, what view did the Ulster Women's Unionist Council take on the issue of the extension of the franchise? And we know from the period there were men, especially Redmond and Carson, who were opposed to the extension of the franchise. Were there any women in public supporting them in those views?
So you have two questions. In nationalist Ireland after 1916, how did the votes of women influence the political situation? And then the northern aspect.
In terms of unionism, you would always get, as you still would, different views about what women or indeed anybody else should or shouldn't do, and so forth. The Ulster Women's Unionist Council, I think, is important because it had a massive popular base, and those women organised very closely. Diane Urquhart's done wonderful work on this in terms of getting women out to vote and supporting the new government and the new constitution and so forth. So I think they were very important at that stage.
I think one of the problems with nationalist women is that because Republicans didn't recognise the Irish Free State and the treaty, they took an abstentionist line and therefore didn't engage with the political institutions. If they were in a political movement, it was Sinn Féin that didn't stand for the Dáil at this time. And what it's a great pity, because what you get is a small group of women, and then they don't stand. They're not there in the body politic as the state is forming and is also producing a lot of legislation that is moving women away from the workplace, from sitting on juries and all of that. So you've got women being in opposition outside, but there isn't anything happening inside, and that's particular to the 26 counties at that time. I mean, Hannashee, Skeffington and some women do join Fianna Fáil for a while because they get very frustrated with the fact that abstentionism is going nowhere, but they find Fianna Fáil not a congenial place, and some of them join the Republican movement again, but they're always small scale and oppositional. It's very difficult at that time, and it's not until the late 1930s and early 40s, for example, Hannah and 3 other women stood as independents in 1943, hoping that a new women's party would be formed and saying this is what is desperately needed in Irish politics. Because what women succeeded in doing with all that you've heard, they succeeded in getting the vote, and what we still don't have in Ireland today, north or south, is adequate representation, and that's the challenge now for women today.
I think if there's two things really that I always think, if the, and this is kind of silly in some ways to say it, but it's in the realm of what if the leaders that were executed had not been executed, we would have had a much different country, because they drew up the Constitution, the proclamation. And the other thing is, what if the women that you speak about hadn't abstained, where obviously they had good reason in their own minds for abstaining, but if they hadn't abstained and had taken part in the election and in the Parliament, again, they could have played a role in trying to produce, resist some of these things that were even brought in only 5 years after the new state was in existence. They started bringing in these anti-women things.
Yeah. Then it was also very difficult. I remember interviewing one Cumann woman who said she came out of jail at the end of the Civil War. She said she was just, she went and tried to start up a poultry farm in Wexford. She had no money. I mean, they were demoralised, impoverished. Life was very difficult for a lot of them. And so the idea of, becoming, politically they withdrew for a while as they kind of regrouped and all of that.
I wonder also, and you referred to it, Rosemary, that whole late 1920s, 1930s period, right across Europe,
Yeah.
You know, the same kinds of
That's
things
true, yeah.
were happening, you know, medals for mothers. And there was also that whole genetic, what do you call it? Eugenics movement, eugenics movement going on as well. You know, the cartoon you showed of the suffragettes who sort of withered women.
Well, you had one
It's-
of them too, hadn't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's precisely the same kind of image used in the debates against women going into higher education. Because if they put their energies all towards that brain work, then, you know, they wouldn't be able to reproduce lovely, healthy children of the next generation. And things like eugenics and so forth, and big, wider political ideologies are in the background.
That's the
to
danger of
everything that's
books.
happening locally, yeah.
It's also interesting that the bulk of the women in the Dáil during the treaty debates were exclusively anti-treaty. I mean, the chauvinist P.S. O'Hegarty on the screen talked about the sea green incorruptibles, the Mary McSweeney's, the Countess Markovich's, the Kathleen Clarks, who were all overwhelmingly anti-treaty. That was probably a reflection of the fact that they were the relatives of people who had died in 1916 or whatever, but they certainly opposed Collins and Griffith in 1922.